A tai tumu tai pari ka wai ana, maha nui ki te paupau o te raki hauiha. A pupu mai ka haua tāwhiri mātu I whakapuri o te awa hoko o te whenua Pākihi waitaha e a ti hei mauri ora. A te mihi tuatahi mihi ki nā atua kaharawa. Ko raki etu iho nei ko papatunuku e takoto nei. Ko tāne ko kahukura ki uta. Ko takaroa, ko marukura ki tai. A e nā atua ho mai o kaha, ho mai o aroha, ho mai o manaaki kia mātou I tēnei wā, I nā wā ka tōhoki, a e nā atua a tēnā koutou. A ka huri au taku whakaaro ki nā tini aitua, ko wehe atu ki te pō. E nā mate, o ia marae, o ia takiwa, o ia motu, o ia whenua, moi mai, oki mai. Ai nā mate, haere hari atura, hari ki Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāumauma. Ai nā mate, moi mai, oki mai. Āpiti hono, tātou hono, rātou kia rātou, āpiti hono, tātou hono, tātou kia tātou te hunga ora. E noho nei, kei raro I te tūnui o tēnei whare o tātou, te whare wānako auraki. A nau mai, hara mai, tauti mai. A nau mai, hara mai, I tēnei pō, hei pō whakanui o tō tātou kaupapa, o te Ara Kākāriki, a tēnā koutou. A nau mai, hara mai hoki, ki te taho o te awa o Ararira, e rere ana ki te tauka o te kiti ika a rākau hautu, te waihora. I roto I te rohe o nai te rua heki, ai tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. A ka tūau, I nāia nei ki te mihi atu ki a koutou, kua tai mai nei, hei karakia, timatanga o tātou nei hui. A kimihia, rapuhia, whai atu uru tapu nui a tānei. Tānei te waiora, tānei te wānaka, tānei te tukaraki. Puta ki te whai au, ki te ao marama. Tū te kana, tū te maraka, te tūhi ki te rārama. E noho I te matāra nei, e roko whakiiriaki ki roka ki a tīna, tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāki e. Kia ora koutou. So welcome everybody. Welcome here tonight. Great to see a massive crowd for our Te Ara Kākāriki annual Friends of TAC meeting. Awesome to see a diverse crowd too, some familiar faces from lots of years gone by, and also some new faces as well. It's great to see such a diverse range of ages and faces, so thank you for coming. Ko waio, who am I? My name's Craig Pauling. I'm the current co-chair along with Peter Joyce of Te Ara Kākāriki, and an original trustee of the trust as well. I know Francis is here. I've seen Francis, one of our other originals. So yeah, great to see you, Francis, as well. It's my honour to stand here and welcome you this evening. All of that stuff I just said before was just a way of introducing myself and our evening. And first of all, I just acknowledged the gods of creation, whatever that means to you, but to me, some specific gods, and also to those people that have gone before us, all of our ancestors from all around the world that have given us the treasures of life. So acknowledging them, and then just returning to everyone here and welcoming you and into this place, to this whare that sits beside the river of Ararira, or the L2, not a very imaginative name, that flows out to Kiti Ika o Rākau Hautu, the fish basket of Rākau Hautu, or Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere. And inside the rohe of Ngāi Te Rua Hiki, the local hapu that resides over at Taumutu, my relations. So it's great to be here, and looking forward to an awesome night. And I'm just going to do a moonwalk over here so I can click the screen and read my notes. That's all good? Hey, first of all, we've got some special guests as well. We've got some councillors from Selwyn District Council I know here. Sam was here before, the Mayor as well. So to you guys, thanks so much for supporting us and coming along. And we've got some staff from Selwyn as well that help us out lots. I know Denise and Andrew, I've seen them before. Thanks for you guys for being here. And we've got we've got some of our landowners too, our Greendot landowners. I know they're in the audience, and we're going to talk about them a little bit later as well and ask some of them to come up if they want. And of course, all of our supporters and people that are here as well. So thank you very much for coming. Oh, and I shouldn't forget, I'm just going to go to my notes. I know I got introduced to him just before, but lots of names here. Bruce, thank you so much for coming. We've got Bruce here from the Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust. And he's going to have an important role to play a bit later on as well. So thanks for coming, Bruce. And I'll get to our speaker later, because you're very important too. But first of all, I'm just going to give you a rundown. And I know that some people, like I said, have been coming to these for a while. But I'm going to give you a bit of a background about Te Ara Kākāriki if you don't know what we do, and about some of our achievements over the last year and what we've been up to. Then we're going to present this wonderful award here. And then we're going to get into our main speaker, and I'll come back to Hugh later. I'm just going to give you a bit of a rundown about what some of the things that we're up to. You may know that we started the trust in the early 2000s and really formed up as a charitable trust in 2006, so we've been going for a wee while now. We're definitely into our teenage years, and you know what teenagers are like, but we're doing pretty good. And the overall vision came from a lot of work of lots of wonderful ecologists, and I know Colin's in the room tonight, work that he and others have done to talk about what we could do for stepping stones across, sort of barren landscapes like we have on the Canterbury Plains. And so we've sort of taken up that challenge over that time and tried to plant, get some green dots, we called them, get some biodiversity sort of spots across the plains. And we're aiming for every 2.5 kilometres, as you can see there. And we're trying to link the foothills, where there's still some good significant ecological biodiversity remaining, trying to link that down towards Te Waihora and, of course, to Pātaka o Rākauhautu, Banks Peninsula. Of course, we're trying to increase biodiversity and habitat. You might have heard the stats that when we started, and probably still we're pretty close to this, there's less than 1% of Indigenous biodiversity left on the Canterbury Plains. So that's the challenge that we took up to really do something about that, because that's just not good enough. To do that, we've reached out to our community, worked with landowners, the community, students, of course, and trying to get them out and understanding that, and getting landowners to want to have these wonderful taonga on their properties and help the whole system. And this year, in the last year, 2021, we had a massive year in terms of how many plants we planted. I remember way back in, I think 2009 was the first time we actually planted some trees. We spent 3 years talking about it. And then we got out there and did it, and I think we might have planted like less than 1,000 plants that first year. But as you can see there, in the last 12 months, we've managed to get almost 30,000 plants in the ground. We have our annual plant out days. We used to just do like one weekend when we first started. Now it's turned into multiple different days. Sometimes we have people on buses, then we have bring your own day, like drive your own day. And we also have community and corporate groups now that we organise special days for. We also have our Kids Discovery plant out, which is an awesome thing. We started sort of halfway through our sort of life to get all the schools in the district really involved in biodiversity restoration. And we have 11 schools that take part now. And as you can see there, huge amounts of volunteers come out and help us do what we need to do. And we also got some amazing funding from Te Papa Atawhai, Department of Conservation, called Kaimahi for Nature. You've probably all heard of that. But that started us with some legacy sites, which were some massive green dots that we've been working on in the last year. And you'll hear a bit more about that soon. Here's our Kaimahi for Nature program. So I know we might have a few of them in the room tonight. Yeah, there they go. We've had an awesome year. planting. It's a 3-year program, and we're planting 50,000 plants at 2 large sites. Like I said, we're calling them legacy sites. One's up at near Springfield, and one's down near Ahuriri Lagoon, near Motukarara, and we're also doing some work in the Otahuna sort of Taitapu area as well. The kids' discovery plant-outs in the community come along to those as well, but the bulk of the work's been done by these guys. You can see them there in the photos working hard, and they've absolutely just nailed planting at some of these sites. And for me, I stood there one day at Ahuriri at the site we were working on there, helping Uncle Les Wanhala from Taumutu do a blessing, and then the next time I came, there was like thousands of trees in front of me. So it's awesome to see the work that we've been able to do with that, getting that support from Kaimahi for Nature. You can see there we also do some other trapping, weed control as part of the process. Here's the Ahuriri site, Te Paewa Ahuriri. So these have been named in conjunction with Ngāi Te Rua Hiki, the hapu or the runanga out at Taumutu, and they've worked with us on these. And of course, Ahuriri Lagoon is an old wetland that used to exist on the Huritini or the Horsell River, like I said, just above Motukarara. And Te Paewa Ahuriri really talks about the sort of entrance to the Ahuriri area. And this is a site here that Environment Canterbury came to us with. There was a spare corner of a triangle paddock that they asked if we wanted to get involved and plant it. And of course we said, yeah, why not? We love doing that. So that's what we've done, but you can also see we've put some amenities in place as well, and big mihi to Lou and her whānau that have done the design and built it, everything with all the workers. So it's been fantastic. So that's the Te Paewa Ahuriri site. You can see the number of plants we've planted this year, and we've got more to plant in the next 12 months as well. The other site is a really special place up at Ara Kākāriki is what it's called. That's the name that was given by the runanga. And this is an old terminal moraine up there at Springfield on one of our trustees' properties, Pam and her family up there. And again, we did a blessing of that site with the runanga. And actually, when we were there, I'll tell you this, we were there, we did the blessing. We walked up on the moraine, come to the end. These plants weren't all there then, of course. We came back and there was a kereru in the, what sort of tree was it, you reckon? Sycamore tree. But there was a kereru, like right there, like, how's that? So we felt that was like an extra blessing for this site. And as you can see, look at the results that we're getting straight away from this site. So really, really proud of that place. You can see the numbers of plants we've done there, and again, we've got 10,000 more to do this year. But look at all these holes that these guys have dug now. Amazing. And just sort of showing you over the years, like I said down there when we first started in 2009, not many plants, but I remember Colin was with me then, and we did a few sites around Springston and Lincoln and down towards the lake. And then ever since then, we've just kept on growing. You can see when the Kids Discovery plant-out came in 2015, and that sort of doubled the amount of plants we could do in a year with all that sort of volunteer effort from the schools. And then we've just grown, and then you'll see in the last year the plants that the Kaimahi for Nature crew have been able to add. So pretty much as our community effort does. You can see there the Kaimahi for Nature work has just sort of quadrupled what we do. So it's awesome to see. And of course, also on this graph shows you the different number of Greendot sites we have across the district. Again, we started with nothing. Like there was nothing when we started in terms of these sorts of sites. And we've grown to over 120 sites you can see there. So it's 120 different places in the district that now have some native biodiversity. So it's been really great to see that growth. And here's the awesome image that I always love to show people of the way we've been able to change that landscape in such a small way. These dots obviously are quite big at this scale. When you zoom in, they're quite small. But anyway, you know, you look at the range of places we've been able to get to, and this is all by actually word of mouth, contacting people. I always used to tell a story about one of the first sites we ever got onto was right in the middle there at Greendot. And when we were first looking at that, Colin was involved then at Manaaki Whenua. We had a big map out looking, because the digital maps weren't as flash back then, and we were looking at this map thinking, what's that green thing there in the middle of the plains? And it was the Greendot golf course. And so I looked up their number on white pages or whatever, found the number, rang the number up and spoke to the person. I said, oh, would you guys like some native plants on the golf course? And they were like, oh, yeah, maybe. Can you come out and talk to our committee? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I drove out to the committee, did a presentation, and they accepted, us to come and plant some plants on the site. But that's sort of how things happened. And then we got on from them. They spoke to their fellow committee members up at Hororata and Glen Tunnel, and the next year we planted up there. And so things have grown like that. And so I just think it's amazing to look at this image and realise that without the start, this wouldn't be there. And the 100,000+ plants have been able to get in the ground. It's just great to see it on a map like that and such a spread of it. We've still got some gaps in the middle, of course. It'd be great to fill them in time, but you can see that sort of network starting to come together. There's some stats up the top, 33 hectares. That's quite amazing in my mind to think that that's how much we've covered. But I don't know if we've reached 1% on the plains yet, but anyway, we'll get there. Hopefully we get to 20% one day, but because that's meant to be the national strategy, that you're meant to get to 20% of biodiversity there. So we've got a wee way to go, people. That's our Greendot map. And I think there was something I was meant to do there. I'm just going to check my notes. Letitia, you'd be like, "Come on, Craig, sort it out." That was the bit where I was going to ask for people? Yeah, sure. So I think we've got some Greendot landowners in the audience tonight, and what we've been doing over the years, of course we weren't this flash when we first started, but over the years we slowly wanted to get signs so that people could be recognised for the work they've done, and when people drive past they start to realise that there's a network out there and there's a partnership that we're sort of developing over time. So if there's any brave people, is Andrew in the audience? Andrew Luddington? No? Who else? Letitia, give me some names. Have you got a sign? Yeah, I've got a sign. You've got a sign? Big one. Have you got a sign? Come down here then. Don't be shy. Yeah, true. I'll go back to the map. Yeah. Can we get these mics to work? Well, you got a big voice, have you?
Yeah, big enough.
Kia ora. So what's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew. Hey, Andrew. How are you?
I'm well.
Do you want to tell us a little bit and maybe point to where your site is on the map?
Yeah, so mine's a pretty new one. I got sections about 4,000 square metres I'm planting out. I've done 1,000 so far, and that was just planted out this year, and it's not on the map, but it's just by Garfield.
Sure.
So another 3,000 to go, and so I put all the plants in myself. I've had a bit of experience up in Wellington putting in with native restoration. I thought it'd be easy. It took a little bit longer than I thought, so top tip, get some help if you can.
Cool. Oh, thanks so much, Andrew, and here's a sign. Welcome to the family. Is there anybody else that's brave enough to come up if you want to tell us, if you haven't got a sign yet? Even if you have got a sign, you can tell us about your place. All good? Hey, thanks so much. And if you're shy and want to come up later and get your sign, that's all good as well. That's all right, Mike. We're all good. So what we're up to this year, what's to come for us this year? Of course, it's coming up springtime. Thank goodness, hopefully. And we're going to have 4 community plant-out days. You can see the dates there. So if you want to come along, I know a lot of you people, the familiar faces I've seen, I know you come out and support us. So get online and register on our website and through the Facebook page links and all that stuff. And we've also got 3 staff corporate days we're doing. We've got all the Kids Discovery plant-out days that we're having. And we've got the Kaimahi sites with those 20,000 plants to go in the ground. And we're also constantly working on funding. So if there's any really wealthy benefactors in the audience now. We've been really lucky with funding in the last few years, so it's been great. But it's been a long journey, and it's something that all trusts and all charitable trusts face, I think, trying to get that money to help do what you need to do. So that's just a constant grind. I know I really look at all of our coordination people here and just really thank them for the time they put in to getting that funding in so we can carry on doing what we're doing. So yeah, it's a big task. And into the future. So every February roughly, we haven't always done this, but we've got better at it every year. We get together all the trustees, we have our ecologists that work with us, all our coordinators, and we get together and we have a strategy day to try to think about the future. And so we're always thinking how we could be better and how we could change. And this year we came up with 3 ideas to keep us moving. So we've gone from the little green dots, distributed all over the plains, small places. Some of them are a bit bigger than others. And we did that for a good decade and worked with the community, built our relationships out there. And then we thought about these legacy sites, and we've started 2 of them. We could obviously have some more if people want to give up 5 or 10 hectares. That's what we've been building on for those legacy sites. And then at our most recent meeting, we talked about this idea of going even bigger. We think maybe what the Canterbury Plains needs is something really big, like 1,000 hectares. And maybe it needs to be a sanctuary, maybe it needs to be fenced, so that we can get that biodiversity really cranking. So that's what we're thinking about. We don't know how we're going to do it. We don't know where we're going to do it. But the idea is there. And the word that I came up with to help put that concept around that is Motu Kākāriki. So Motu really means an island. And Kākāriki is obviously one of our inspirations behind this project. So we'll try to create the island for the Kākāriki on the Canterbury Plains. So yeah, that's one of the ideas we're thinking about. If you've got any ideas out there, if you've got 1,000 hectares you want to get that. So that's what we're trying to do. We'll probably definitely talk to the councils. We'll talk to Environment Canterbury. We'll talk to Selwyn, and we'll think about what they might have. We'll think about how that we could join with others. It doesn't have to be 1,000 hectares, but we want it to be substantial, to be bigger than these legacy sites we've been looking at. And that all does feed back into the work that Colin and others did around those stepping stones and getting something substantial. The other idea that we've had is we've been chipping away at this over the years, and so have lots of other groups actually, about actually completing the riparian planting on the Huritini or the Horsell River, right from town, right from Christchurch, right out past Taitapu and into the Selwyn District and down to Waihora. We think that's doable over time. It's not a massive river, but a lot of work to be done for sure. But as I've talked about, there's lots of good work that's already been done. So that's something that we think is achievable in time. So again, we're putting that out to the world. And the last one there was really about, we thought that actually we don't know if the story of biodiversity, I mean, Hugh's had his film, so that's cool. But we don't know if the story of the effort of the community has really been documented and told yet. So we're sort of putting that out there too, to document and tell the story of all this effort that landowners, the community, agencies and others have put into trying to restore biodiversity on the Canterbury Plains. So if there's any talented movie makers out there or documentary makers, come and see us, because these are the things that we think we need to do. So yeah, that's us going forward. And we'd love your feedback tonight at the end of the session or whatever, if you want to tell us about your thoughts about those things. Okay, next. Bruce, do you want to come up, please? So you might know there's a bit of history here. Obviously, you can see the name that's associated with this cup, Diana Isaac. She was a great benefactor of our trust, and obviously the Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust is named after her and was started by her. And it was really down to Ian, I don't think Ian's here tonight, Professor Ian Spellerberg, who built that relationship between us and Lady Diana. And we were lucky enough to have this cup gifted to us so that we could recognise people that were doing this fine work on the Canterbury Plains. So I think it's every year or every 2 years? Every 2 years we run this award and recognise someone who's done an outstanding effort in those last 2 years. Bruce, did you want to say anything else about the trust?
No, except just listening to what you...
I think that's it.
I haven't got a speech, ladies and gentlemen, but I just wanted to really congratulate yourselves on the great job that you're doing, and obviously you've got some aspirations for the future as well. I think it's fantastic, so well done.
Thank you, Bruce. So, I'm really going to find my notes now, Letitia, sorry. I shouldn't have taken the staple out, Letitia? So, and I know this person well. So this person's used to be a former trustee of Te Ara Kākāriki, got involved with our trust. He's got an amazing site just around his property, just not far from here in Lincoln. He's put a massive effort into planting a challenging site. He's put in 4,000 plants with the trust, but also his family and friends. He's been a superb role model, getting his workmates at ESR involved as well, having family plantings, been hands-on trustee, like I said, between 2017 and 2019. This year he hosted a group as part of his annual plant-out tours. He's also had his challenges. The site, I know I've been there when it's really wet, and at certain times of the year it can be really, really dry as well. Takes an enormous amount of time to weed all those 4,000 plants, and it can be quite overwhelming. But we really want to congratulate Wim Nijhoff for this award. So Wim, if you're there, please come down. Thank you. Are you taking photos? That's good. Wim, do you want? Oh, yeah, for sure. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that goes with it.
Thank you. Certificate? No, I'll keep the wine.
You hold that while we take the photo, maybe. Should we take a photo there?
I'll just say a couple of things.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Come over here if you want. Do you want the mic here? Yeah, we can hold that for you, mate.
This is, I really appreciate this because it's hard work, but it's so satisfying as well. So, and I just want to probably thank the trust, of course, with all the help they've provided with volunteers, but also with the Kaimahi people, the team of Shannon that helped me with weed control this summer, because it was horrendous because we had a wet summer. Everything growed plants, but also the weeds, and it was just really hard to stay on top of things. And in Selwyn Council, they've been supporting me for since 2014 with SNEF money funds. What is Selwyn Natural Environment Fund. So if you've got a site and you want some plants, I would suggest apply for that. Again, hard work, but very satisfying. And if you're a landowner, have a chat, but I can recommend you to do something like this. It's amazing what you see. The birds within a couple of years is coming back, and it's so satisfying to walk through it and hear the bellbirds and the warblers and things like that coming back. So it's great. And thank you, Greg.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well done. Do you want to take that? You can hold that, Andy. Cool. So we're almost at the bit you've been waiting for, I know. But just finally, just wanted to say thanks again to all our great supporters that we've got. You can see them all there. You know, Bruce, you've come along tonight. The Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust has been a great supporter, like I said, for many years. The Regional Council, the District Council, of course, Te Papa Atawhai, But all those great funders there have done amazing things for us. And like I said, when we started, we had nothing, and we've grown those relationships year on year. But also, of course, to all the landowners like Wim and others that are here, Andrew, that have actually took up the challenge and planted the plants on their property, gave up their land to help us all. So just really want to thank everybody. Kia ora. So next up, kia koe te rangatira e Hugh. Nei te mi kia koe mo tō mahi uaua ia tau kei te hiki mai nei hoki. Mo tō mahi hei whakahaumanu nā rākau, nā manu, nā karara o te pātaka o rākau hautu. Ai, kei te mihi kia koe, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. So everybody, just wanted you to, we've got a wonderful guest tonight. You might have seen the documentary he's been in. I've met him before. I don't know if he remembers meeting me, but I came out and volunteered way back when I was at this university with my friends, and had a wonderful weekend at Hinewai. And from that date, even before that, he was a legend in my eyes. So really honoured to stand here and be able to introduce you, and really looking forward to hearing you speak, so I can actually sit down too. But it's a real honour to have you here. You know, I've heard a lot of people over the years say that what you did was never going to work. And it's great to be able to sit in meetings and tell them and go, hey, but there's this guy, he did this thing, and it actually does work, people, because some people just didn't believe or couldn't see it. So yeah, just want to acknowledge you for your wonderful work, and thanks for coming here, and really looking forward to hearing you speak. So everybody, please put your hands together for Hugh Wilson. Do you want a lapel or anything?
Should I just in case? Yeah, probably do that.
I can just give you this one. We'll give you this one. Unless you just want to do that.
That's going. Can you hear me? Yep. Kia ora watu e Craig, ngā hinui ki a koe hoki. Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I'm going to live up to this, because I have a relative who's, I won't say who it is, but he thinks he knows everything. And when I told him I was coming along to talk to Ara Kākāriki about regeneration, natural regeneration versus artificial planting, he said, no one will come. They're all very keen planters, and you're going to talk about the very opposite of what they're doing. So you'll know that I am a very great proponent of the natural regeneration of native vegetation across New Zealand. But I'm certainly going to take a much more nuanced stance than that, if I can. He said that my title was boring. I remember Peter Joyce came to talk to me. He comes every week and helps us. He's marvellous. And Annabelle comes as well most days, and she's marvellous too. While Peter and I are working away, she often goes wandering through our track. She's the unofficial track inspector. And Peter and Annabelle said to me, would I come along and talk to the Ara Kākāriki annual meeting? And I said yes, because one, I had to keep him coming to Hinewai, you see. And I was very dubious about it. At first I thought what I was going to do was come along, sit on their kitchen table and have a little sort of friendly chat to the kaimahi workers. That's what I thought we were going to do in front of their fire. So I said yes before I had any idea that I was going to be talking to a whole lecture theatre here. But Peter, he said, no, you must come and do it. And I said, look, I'm likely to make a fool of myself. I'm getting old. My brain's not working as well as it used to. And he said, making a fool of yourself, I'd love that. So I couldn't get out of it, unfortunately. Well, no, I won't say unfortunately, because it's a delight to be here. My relative who knows everything, he's the one who said, yes, I did think I was mistaken. I did think I was wrong once, but it turned out that I was mistaken. He's that one. He also suggested that maybe just to stop everyone going to sleep while I was talking about a subject that was sort of the antithesis of what you're doing, he said, start off with a joke. Well, you know, every now and again I have to talk to groups of students at Hinewai. The American students come quite often. They stopped coming for a while because of COVID, but they started coming regularly again. And I thought, well, I will. The students sometimes sit there looking completely blankly at you, and I thought, I will start with a joke. And I said to them, look, it's amazing, we do speak the same language, but not quite. I said, it has always amazed me that of all the different versions of English, Kiwi is the only one without an accent. And I thought they'd burst into raucous laughter, and they just sat there looking at me totally blankly. I've never had a joke fall so flat. And their professor looked over to me and he said, they didn't understand a word that you said. So that was embarrassing. It's not only Americans you've got to watch, you know, you've got to watch the Australians every now and again. We had a wonderful Australian working for us one summer called Pete. And he was very rude about our New Zealand accent. Well, imagine the reverse could be said, couldn't it? But one of the things he said to me one day was, look, Kiwi English is interesting, but this use of the word we, like a wee bit, is just, he said, it's ridiculous. No Australian would ever say a wee bit. And then he added on, he said, well, no one over 5 anyway. And I said to Pete, what would you say instead? And he said, we would say a small amount. And I said, Pete, I'm a small amount offended by that comment. You try and think of not using English without saying a wee bit every now and again. It's almost impossible. It did sound a boring title, but it's natural regeneration or planting. You see, I thought it was going to be to plant or not to plant. That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the flesh. Oh, no, that's someone else's talk. No, to plant or not to plant, that is the question. So that's what I am going to talk about. And I am a proponent of natural regeneration with minimal interference management. But you'll find out by the end of what I'm going to say that I'm certainly not opposed to planting. And Peter and Annabelle were all poised to say, how many plants have you actually planted, Hugh? And it's an embarrassingly large number. Because even on Hinewai, we've planted a lot of plants, and everybody loves planting. It's extremely satisfying and often very useful as well. But I want to take a sort of a bit of a nuanced stance on it, if I could. I think most of you know the Hinewai story, how I was a botanist, I am still a botanist, doing a botanical survey of Te Pātaka o Rākaihautū, Banks Peninsula. I thought I knew Banks Peninsula so well because I was born in Timaru, and then the family moved up to Christchurch when my twin sister and I were only 6, I think it was. So Ōtautahi Christchurch has been our family base for what seems like forever. And just about every weekend we would climb Te Ahupātiki. We'd take the train and then the boat. That's what you used to be able to do before the world changed. And then just kids, we'd just wander up Te Ahupātiki. And it was like our back door. But as I was walking across those slopes, often Mount Herbert, often other parts of Banks Peninsula, but I thought to myself, gosh, the natural regeneration is just about gone. And in a sense it had, because, you know, the 2 big waves of human settlement, the amazing Polynesian voyagers arrived here 800 years ago or so, and then a wave of Europeans arrived, and after that we've got all sorts of people, which I think is absolutely marvellous. But those big waves of human settlement, we sound as if the Canterbury Plains are devoid of natural vegetation now, which they are. But Banks Peninsula, which was once forested from side to side and from top to bottom, by the end of the, in the first few 100 years of human settlement here, we lost perhaps a quarter to a third of the forest cover, so drastically that when the European botanists first arrived, they thought that was natural vegetation. They thought that the silver tussock and the fescue tussock across the top of Te Ahupātiki was just completely natural vegetation in equilibrium with the local climate. But in fact, it was far from that. Banks Peninsula was forested from top to bottom and from side to side. And it's about 100,000 hectares in extent. Interestingly enough, we lost quite a few birds during Polynesian settlement. And then we lost a lot more during European settlement, so that by about 1900, there was less than 1% of the old growth forest left on Banks Peninsula. That's a startling figure when you think of it. And in those two big waves of human settlement which did that, we lost about half of the breeding land birds on Banks Peninsula. But a lot of them thrived through Māori times. When Europeans first came here, they saw native parrots and saddlebacks, Ara Kākāriki, all sorts of birds that had survived all those, the needs of the Māori people trying to make a living here. And then in the, about 70 years of European settlement, we had lost another huge number of birds, an unknown number of insects and lizards, and we'd lost almost all the old growth forest. That's pretty startling, isn't it? By 1900, we estimate that there was 0.7 of 1% of Banks Peninsula had its old growth forest. And you know, they were still milling it for another 20 years. The last bills stopped operating on Banks Peninsula in the 1920s, and they were taking out native forest. And there's a little article I found in the Akaroa Mail of about 1922 or something, when it said that the Stony Bay bush, that's not the Stony Bay next to Hinewai, that's the Stony Bay on the north coast of Banks Peninsula. And there's a bush there which was sort of known locally after its European farmer called Bolin's Bush. And this article said, lovers of native bush will be sad to hear that the 20 hectares or so of Bolin's Bush that has been a marvellous remnant, they were talking about that in the 1920s as being a marvellous remnant, it's going to be logged for timber. And it's expected to keep the mill going for about 2 years. It's amazing, isn't it, when you think of it? So I reckon by the time I started my botanical survey in 1983, there was about 0.6 of 1% of old growth forest left. Now, that's the bad news, and the bad news that we lost half our breeding bird species, land bird species. But the good news is that even in 1900, there was a lot of regenerating bush already. There was never, ever that less than 1% of native bush across Banks Peninsula, but the old growth forest was almost gone. We just got tiny remnants of it left. So that native bush, it was being burned right through the 800 years of human settlement in Aotearoa. The native bush was trying to regenerate and still being burned again. You know, with people here, you get fire. Before people came here, fire must have been extremely rare in New Zealand generally. And it was largely only started by lightning and by volcanic eruptions when that happened, but that's pretty long, few and far between. But the native forest that was trying to regenerate was constantly burned. But all the time, nature was just itching to get, that's how I like to put it, itching to get native forest back on the land again, which is naturally forested. So that I reckon that by 1900, there might have been 0.6 of 1% of old growth forest, but there was perhaps 10% of regenerating kānuka and other mixed hardwoods like kōtukutuku, native fuchsia, five-finger, wineberry, mako, mahoi in particular. Amazing, you know, mahoi, which you'll all know, I'm sure, the European settlers either called it whitey wood because of its white bark, or cow leaf because it was so palatable to the animals that they wanted to graze on the grassland that had once been occupied by forest. So mahoi, despite its palatability, is the most common native hardwood tree species on Banks Peninsula now. That's pretty amazing. You'd think kānuka would be, but in fact, that's going by my systematic sort of grid pattern across the peninsula. Mahoi comes out way out on top, even above kānuka. So nature was just itching to get the forest back. It's amazing when you think some of the bird species that we still have here, how they survived it all through that huge sort of nadir of natural habitat cover. But the bad news is we lost about half our breeding bird species. The good news is that we've still got half. So it's a sort of half full, half empty glass. The birds that have survived through all that nadir of native forest cover have bounced back as native forest just continues against all odds, in many cases, keeps trying to reclothe the land. Now, the whole point of Hinewai is that here was I, a botanist, wandering through Banks Peninsula, as a child thinking that the whole ecosystem had been trashed almost out of existence and that we'd lost most of our native biodiversity. But the thing is that the native biodiversity were itching to get back, and my botanical survey soon made that quite clear to me, that after the first year of my survey I thought, gosh, it's not what we've lost, it's what's still here, and what's still just itching to get back. And I thought to myself, gosh, if only I could look after a bit of this land, even if 100 hectares, and let nature get on with it, and I'd try and take away the deleterious things that were stopping the natural regeneration from taking place, and nature would put the bush back. And as Craig said, this was regarded with enormous scepticism by my farming neighbours. I have to be careful what I say about farmers, because when I came onto Banks Peninsula and started working there, I was actually in awe of farmers. I thought, gosh, here am I, a sort of a greeny botanist from the city, really, coming to look after bits of land which they've been looking after. And I thought, here's these farmers who are so competent and so efficient at doing what they do. Well, I mean, this is true. Do you know, I know some farmers on Banks Peninsula who are so tough that they can tear the Akaroa telephone directory in half with their bare hands. And this is with both the pages folded over. So they're a pretty tough lot. They're more tough than pretty, I have to say. But most of the farmers around us were extremely sceptical. And so, with most other people, it seems bizarre to me, because I think that every ecologist knows that gorse, for example, act as a brilliant nurse canopy for we'd rather not have it, you know. How much gorse can you see in that picture? Not very much, to be honest now. But the land that we took over in 1987, bought by the Morris White Native Forest Trust, only 109 hectares, was basically a rundown, totally uneconomic pastoral farmland, I should say. And when I say that the Morris White Native Forest bought it, I have this great difficulty in land ownership. The whole notion of people being able to own land as if it's a commodity just seems so absurd to me. And I think it's very interesting, because this was a bit of a reason why Pākehā and Māori had big differences over how they regarded land to begin with. I don't think any Polynesian people would think that you could own land. Surely they could say, we have rights on this land, but to actually own it as if we were the most important thing in the whole ecosystem is pretty bizarre. But unfortunately, our European ancestors really thought that land was a commodity to be owned and traded and was there for our use and for nothing else. So it was a big difference, I think, and it's been a big part of our history, dealing with that difference. So the land ownership is a funny notion, I think. But we owned in the beginning 109 hectares, and the only way it happened was that I was introduced, as I'm sure most of you know, to not very wealthy, but a very conservation-minded Christchurch businessman. I could never, if ever, have done it on my own, because I'd never earned much money in my whole life. And I always had enough money, but except for buying land, which when you live in a society that treats land like this, you have to go along with if you want to have some management control over the land or some rights on it. But Morris White, who just died about 3 years ago, aged 96, he was a remarkable man, really. It was interesting how we had lots of differences. I think he thought I was a sort of very lefty, greeny idealist. And I thought he was a bit conservative and very financially astute. And that was enough for me, because I wasn't financially astute. And he came up he'd set up a fund for conservation on Banks Peninsula to be used for the purchase of land for what he regarded would be a sanctuary for our native birds. That's how he saw it. And one of our differences was that after a while he said to me, look, Hugh, it's wonderful all this emphasis on the botany and on the vegetation, but I had more of an idea that this would be a sanctuary for our native birds. And I said, Morris, habitat is everything. Habitat is everything. And so we learned a lot from each other, because I learned a lot from his financial nous, and I think he learned a little bit from me. He did realise that habitat was everything. Anyway, to put a long story short, I'm talking. I should have said from the beginning, seeing I thought this was going to be a little fireside chat with just the Kaimahi workers, it would make it much nicer and then less formal if you butted in and ask any time, ask a question. And I have to watch the time, don't I? Sure. Well, go to sleep at any rate. Yeah. By all means, go to sleep. So do butt and ask questions. I think if I don't talk too much, there might be time for questions at the end. So whatever you'd like. Yeah. The whole notion of Hinewai was that we wanted to look after this land, and as I said, to me, every ecologist in the world should know that colonising woody shrub like gorse gives way to native forest in a forest climate. That's what it does. Just like our native kānuka and manuka, our native woody colonising species, and they colonise bare ground. They love disturbance. They just leap into the gap. If there was no disturbance on Banks Peninsula, a tree like kānuka would be uncommon or rare. But it depends on disturbances, and these can be landslips or rare natural fires in particular, those two things in particular. And that's the only reason we have plants like kānuka and silver tussock and all those sort of things. In fact, some of those were just hanging on Banks Peninsula, but very restricted to places where trees couldn't grow because the ground was so steep and soil couldn't accumulate, and trees even there grew, but they were scattered and there were open spaces as well. So kānuka and manuka and gorse and broom, the latter two being exotic shrubs from the northern hemisphere from a long way away, they all act in a very similar way. Gorse and broom only live, or broom in particular, is very fast growing and very short-lived. Gorse is fast growing and also short-lived, but it doesn't last that long. The oldest gorse bushes on Hinewai now would be about 40 years. And then by that time they're looking a bit like me. They're looking old and tired and decrepit. And then if they haven't already been shaded by the natives coming through them, they just die of old age. Whereas kānuka, what a wonderful tree kānuka is, isn't it? Kānuka it grows to at least 120 years before it really start looking like me and looking as if it's ready to fall over. So the big trees in the garden of Tane and Akaroa would be about 120 years old, and you can see that they're just getting to the very end of their lives and getting very tired and ready to fall over. It is different because under kānuka, which is a native, and it forms a wonderful forest in its own right, but for that to transform into, in our corner of Banks Peninsula, beech forest above about 200 metres, that's unusual for Banks Peninsula. But in the rest of Banks Peninsula, to transform from kānuka to podocarp hardwood forest, that's tōtara, matai, kahikatea, two species of tōtara. Someone wants to call in? That takes longer for the kānuka to give way because it grows very tall, pretty tall, and is not shaded so readily by the other natives, the shade-tolerant natives coming through them. Whereas gorse, people said to me, of course, it will never happen, as Craig mentioned. And even this is awful, even some ecologists said, well, it might happen in the most favoured places if you wait long enough, and if certain conditions are met, the gorse may give way to native forest regeneration. And I said, well, I know it will give way to forest regeneration. I know it's a certainty. And they said, well, how certain can you be? And this is going to make me sound a bit of an arrogant scientist or something, because I said, well, you can never be certain about everything, but I'm about as certain that the gorse on our patch of Hinewai will give way to native forest. I'm about as certain that it is if the sun is going to come up tomorrow morning. Well, you can't be absolutely certain of that, but you can be fairly confident, I would think, after 4 billion years, or 8 billion years, or whatever it is. So they still didn't believe me. The farmers, the nice thing is that after only 35 years, which is not all that long, as a mere blink in ecological or geological history, after 35 years, I don't think there's a single farmer, even the ones we still don't quite get on 100% with, are not completely behind what's happening on Hinewai. And indeed, you'd have to shut your eyes. Because the whole point is that, and this is why it sounds as if I'm not very pro-planting, because on Hinewai, and I have to admit that everything is going for it there. It has too much rainfall at the moment. It has good, pretty reliable rain. We do get droughts, but it's pretty reliable rain. There are seed sources nearby, so it's quite quick. There's still enough of the agents like the birds and the wind to disperse those seeds with unbelievable efficiency. So on a place like Hinewai, I predicted that within 10 years in the best places, the gorse would be overcome by native forest, native hardwood canopy. And at the slowest places would take up to 35 years. And again, I'm going to sound like an arrogant scientist, because that is exactly what has happened. And you'd have to shut your eyes now for a farmer to come and look at Hinewai and say, well, this is not going to happen, because it's in front of his or her eyes. So, and that's, the point is that has all happened under what we would like to call minimum interference management. When we say natural regeneration and minimum interference management, we don't mean to say that we're sitting on the balconies of our houses looking down the valley like this, and just sipping our Pinot Gris or whatever it is. It leaves us an unbelievable amount of work. But the work involved on Hinewai is not planting. So it's recognising that we do have an inflated view of our own importance in putting, this sounds awful, I'm going to nuance this in a minute, but a sort of inflated opinion of our own importance in restoring what we've already destroyed. And also, though, even more importantly, a total underestimation of how efficient nature is at producing seed in just unbelievably vast quantities and dispersing it with unbelievable efficiency. And this has really been brought home to us recently, because we've just had a series of, as you know, 5 deluges. The last was yesterday, and I haven't been home since then, so I'm feeling daunted about going home to see what extra damage has been done. But in the December one, we had landslides and gutted streams on a scale that we'd never even thought of before, and no one on Banks Peninsula can ever remember, no one living on Banks Peninsula can remember anything like it. Now, that's because we don't live long enough. There were on Hinewai itself, there's a landslide that happened several thousand years ago, as far as we know, that was about a kilometre wide and about 2.5 kilometres long, and completely transformed the shape of the upper Otanerito Valley. But that was before any of us were even, or our ancestors were even anywhere near Aotearoa. But in relatively recent times, the haze in Pigeon Bay, after rainfalls just like we're getting now, had an immense landslide which took away their homestead, threatened lives, destroyed a large part of their farming land. And that was, I think, 1884, something. I probably have got the date on my notes, but something like that. So it has happened before. The fear is that it's going to happen with increasing frequency as we continue to wreck the climate. But it has happened before. And when it happened in December, the scale of the destruction was huge. And someone said to us, well, are you going to mend it by planting the slips? And it hadn't even occurred to me that we'd even think of planting the slips. And in a month's time, wandering over the slips, nature had already set to work to put in trillions and trillions and trillions. And I didn't count them. This is just off the top of my head, and quite a lot's got off the top of my head in the last few decades. But just off the top of my head, I trillions of trillions of trillions. And this were gorse seedlings, unbelievable number of gorse. Well, not unbelievable, we thought that would happen. And also a native plant, poroporo, the same genus as potato and tomato. They're in their maybe trillions, billions, trillions, probably are trillions. Both of those plants, one exotic, one native, has got a seed bank in the soil, a long-lived seed banks. And kereru, for example, are just constantly feeding on those lovely big ripe fruit of poroporo and pooing across the whole 1,500 hectares that we're trying to look after. And every time there's a disturbance, the poroporo and the gorse, away they go. And they love it. But it's not just poroporo and gorse. Wineberry, mako, a lovely, rapid-growing native hardwood tree, I'm sure you all know it, does have a tendency to grow, and some of them just suddenly die for no reason at all, but nature deals in so many, doesn't really matter. So wineberry seedlings must also have a seed bank in the soil, I'm sure. Kānaka definitely doesn't have a seed bank in the soil because the seeds are so tiny that they've just got no reserves to last for long in a soil bank. So Kānaka and other plants depend on this constant rain of native seed being blown by wind in the case of Kānaka, and you'll be amazed how far it can go. The point I'm making is that there is no limiting factor in terms of seed production and seed dispersal to repopulate the whole of Hinewai, and that's exactly what's happened. And when I say we haven't, when I do say we haven't planted anything, that's a total lie, because I love planting like everybody else, and we planted thousands of trees, mostly just around the homesteads and the visitor centre, and largely just. The most important, really, to me, is we've planted representative sort of arboreta at the two different altitudes. One down at Otanerito Homestead, which is near sea level, and where native to that altitude is things like nicole palm, and kawakawa, and titoki, and akeake. Lots and lots of native trees, shrubs, and vines, and ferns that come as far south as Te Pātaka o Rākai Hautu, and don't get any further south. So that's interesting, and we grow lovely specimens of those trees. They are largely for educational purposes, but also to measure the growth rates of these things. And that's important, as I'll come across in a moment, to say that we know something about the growth rates of these native species. Higher up at my level, at 450 metres, where I live, and where the visitor centre is, we grow things like the native beeches, red and black, Tawai Raunui and Tawai Rauriki, and toi, the beautiful broadleaf cabbage tree, which is native to the high parts of Banks Peninsula, and needs a cold, wet, it looks like a tropical palm, doesn't it? But it demands a cold, wet climate. And it shows what, it hints more than anything else, that the highest parts of Banks Peninsula are wet and cold, up till now anyway. Well, they're certainly wet now, and maybe getting less cold. But the point is that, and the point I want to emphasise is that nature is just unbelievably efficient at producing seed and dispersing it. And then people say, well, everything's for Hinewai, the seed sources are close by. But I would say that anywhere in New Zealand, imagine if we did wipe ourselves out for the silly things we're doing, but we didn't wipe everything else out. Nature would just get on with putting forest back across most of New Zealand. And dare I say it across the plains too, but that would be so slow that I certainly think the project that Te Ara Kākāriki doing is absolutely wonderful. There we go. Despite what I've just said about natural regeneration, because the plains, I would say the Canterbury Plains would be one of the world's outstanding regions where natural ecosystems have been obliterated. And there really is very, very little native vegetation left on the Canterbury Plains. And they were a wonderfully interesting environment because it's so dynamic. Those big rivers were swinging backwards and forwards across it. And it wasn't all forested by any means because it was too dynamic for that. And so there was extensive areas of tussock and matagari to matakuru. And there were places where forest had developed because just because of the way the rivers were sort of changing course across the plains, some areas were left untouched. And Riccarton Bush is just such an unbelievable and wonderful, valuable fragment of that sort of plains vegetation. There was far more of that Kaikatea forest on the plains than Riccarton Bush. Papua Nui Bush was pretty extensive as well, even when the Europeans came. But a large part of the eastern South Island was deforested by Māori time burning. And then when the Europeans came and found a lot of that open country, even some of Banks Peninsula was so open because of Polynesian burning that they didn't have to clear the forest, they just put the cattle straight on. The Rhodes family in Flea Bay, Pohatu, and the southeast corner where Hinewai now is, they just put the cattle out onto natural vegetation, silver tussock, bracken, shrubland, all trying to get back to forest, but being inhibited by repeated burning, human-induced burning. But nature wouldn't take very long if we weren't here to put native forest back across the whole of Banks Peninsula. But again, I say it would take a long, long time to put it back across the plains. And of course now, if people just disappeared, we wouldn't get the vegetation back, anything like that was there before, because we've got so many exotic plants into the picture as well. But it's all a matter of timing, isn't it? And Hinewai is near the top end of the speed with which this happens. But you'd be amazed how much of New Zealand is available for rapid natural regeneration of native forest given half a chance. It's happening anyway, and if what nature sort of demands of us that we just take away the most deleterious things that prevent it happening, then she just gets on with it. She gets on with it anyway, but we can speed it up a bit by taking out the possums and the deer and the pigs and just honing in on one or two exotic plant species that while we're here we can deal with, and if we weren't here, we couldn't deal with, and nature would just use them. Nature would, 150 years hence, if we had gone 150 years ago and you walked across the Canterbury Plains, a large part of it would be forest, but it would have plants like sycamore in it, and Pinus radiata, for example. And can I get on to Pinus radiata? How much time have I got? Yeah, so can I just talk? And how many of you are asleep already? The thing about natural regeneration to me has all sorts of connotations. It's so important just in terms of the scientific interest, the ecologically appropriateness, the mistakes that we can make if we interfere too much. And I sometimes, this is not my idea, this is by a lovely botanical colleague of mine called Shannon Courtney, when he was talking about bringing in restoration projects, planting restoration projects, plants from elsewhere that were native to New Zealand. And he said, look, it may sound very pedantic and very conceited and precious to talk like this, but think of it, if you have any interest in, say, English literature, think of this, think of the most perfect poem that you know, if you're interested in poetry, or the best novel that you know, and it's like saying, well, I'll interfere with this because it's all English, and these are English words I'm going to put in here, but I think I prefer to put a few of these words in here and change the order of the words around here. You'd still have an English poem, but it would be nothing like the perfectly formed and beautiful work of literature that you have. Well, and to me, if we do the wrong things in restoration planting, these are just cautions. These are not anti-planting. These are cautions. You can, it's like blurring a poem, because the intricate patterns of nature are just, we understand a little bit of them, but the more we understand of them, the more we think, gosh, we can't understand this at all. This is just so intricate, so beautiful, so complicated that and if we interfere too much, we're blurring it without even knowing what we're doing. So to me, introducing, say, a North Island version of Akiraho, Olearia paniculata, onto the Port Hills, for example, which was done because we didn't quite know what we were doing then. That's like mucking around with Stevie Smith's poetry or Wordsworth or Shakespeare. That's what it's like to me. That's not my idea. That's Shannon Courtney's. I think he's rather clever to think that. The thing about Pinus radiata, and again, this is relevant to planting and natural regeneration. You see, because people still don't believe that natural regeneration is very efficient at putting native forest back, whereas nature is actually about 1 million times more efficient at it than we are, and I think Hinewai demonstrates this. Because one of the ideas of sequestering carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere involves increasing the forest cover across all the parts of the planet that we don't need for food production that can grow forest, and it's vast, vast areas. So in New Zealand, unfortunately, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of action in saying, well, look, we haven't got much time. This is very rich, isn't it? Because we knew about global warming back in the 1980s, and we say we haven't got time now, so we've got to plant an exotic, fast-growing softwood from America with no relatives in New Zealand at all. At least they won't hybridise and cross with anything native here, but we'll plant these for carbon sequestration, not for timber. That's another thing altogether. In a way, growing Pinus radiata for timber has in some way saved a lot of native forest from being cut down. But the idea of planting Pinus radiata for carbon sequestration means that you leave it there. You plant it and it's permanent. And they say, no, say the proponents of Pinus radiata carbon sequestration, no, they say it's not permanent. This will just act as a nurse canopy for native forest, and the native trees will grow under it and replace the pines, which is just enough true, just sufficiently true for them to believe it. But it's bullshit. It's nonsense. Once you've introduced pines into an ecosystem and they become an established part of that ecosystem, it's all very well to say that, particularly on places like Banks Peninsula, natives will grow underneath it, and eventually the pines will die, and Pinus radiata can't regenerate under its own shade or any other shade, just like gorse can't, but it lives for several hundred years, so it takes a long time for that transformation to take place, and in the meantime it may be quite a good habitat for some native fauna, but it's still nothing like the ecosystem that is anywhere near natural. And then every time we have major disturbance, pines will just leap in there as the early colonizers, and you get another few hundred years of pine domination. So what I'm saying is that introducing Pinus radiata into any ecosystem just means that it's entrenched in the ecosystem forever. I don't think that's too much to say. But also, it's nonsense also because Pinus radiata, you can look at the carbon sequestration curves and they go up and up like this for about 20 years. And after 25 years, they're actually going down. So they've stopped. They're still sequestering carbon, but they're aspiring as fast as they're sequestering it. So a sort of dynamic equilibrium, they're not adding to taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Well, you look at a native forest curve, and it just keeps going up more slowly to begin with, substantially more slowly to begin with, up and up and up, and just keeps going up for 150 years and beyond. So it makes no sense whatsoever. And then they say, the proponents of Pinus radiata for carbon sequestration say, well, there's no comparison between the cost of planting Pinus radiata and the cost of planting natives. And we then say, we're not talking about planting natives, we're talking about nature doing all that work for nothing. That's the contrast. That's why I get quite fired up about it. But that doesn't mean to say I'm fired up against planting natives. I'm just saying I get fired up against suggesting that we can plant natives for carbon sequestration anywhere near the level that nature can do it over the millions of hectares of marginal hill country in the whole country, through the whole of Aotearoa. It's in terms of scale, that completely overwhelms a time argument. So to me, it's just an obscenity to suggest that you can plant Pinus radiata to sequester carbon, ignore all the biodiversity issues that are involved, and just ignore the fact that natural regeneration of native forest, managed properly, still have to manage it, not sitting on your balcony watching it, but the comparison is just not there. The only other thing I should mention about carbon sequestration is that people have this complete myth that natives grow slowly. Have you noticed that? You know they don't. I mean, I've just been out to look at some of the Te Ara Kākāriki plantings today, and 2 years after putting some in, it's just about a forest already. It's just unbelievable. Native plants do not grow slowly. If you compare them with the first few years of Pinus radiata, that is slow. It is slow. And if you take a matai, which sort of forms that funny tangled, brown, dead-looking mass for the first, 20 years, you think this is just ridiculously slow. But 20 years is nothing. And then after 20 years, all of a sudden it decides to go adolescent, which of course has a few problems, but not for matai. And then it sort of rockets up and you get this beautiful tree in not really no time at all. Well, that's one of the slowest. Plants like tōtara is a fantastic wood, huge cultural significance, a beautiful timber, a wonderful tree, a huge part of a natural ecosystem in Potocarp hardwood forest. They're not slow at all. And fortunately, we've done our measurements, you see, because of all the trees that grow on Hinewai, we've got measured specimens. And Peter Joyce was showing me today how he's now tagged a lot of his trees and he's measuring them and measuring their heights and their diameters. So we know that if you plant, say, native beech trees in the right places, in the right climates or on the right soils, you can get timber production, if you wanted to, from them within a time scale that is not all that different from a Pinus radiata plantation. And some work's been done on kauri up in the north, and the growth rates of kauri are quite staggering when you look at the data. So that's another reason why really the arguments are not for planting exotics for carbon sequestration. Now the arguments, have I got 10 more minutes? No one's asked a question yet, so either you're all asleep or... The only other thing I want to say about planting is that in a way the Canterbury Plains, which is where your focus, is one area in the world where I would say go for it, because there's the slowness of native forest, making green corridors across the Canterbury Plains, linking Banks Peninsula with the Southern Alps, would be so slow in terms of our lifetimes and quite substantially, significantly slow ecologically too, that this is one place where it makes enormous sense. I have no argument with that whatsoever. But I would say, just remember Shannon Courtney's thing. And I know that you're completely aware of this, but it's so easy to slip into saying, well, this is the only plants we could get, and these are near enough. I would be unbelievably pedantic about eco-sourcing, I think we call it, don't we? It is so important in planting programs that I would just really push and push and push it, even if I sound like a pedantic and precious old nutcase, really. It's very important to think along those lines. Also, it is sometimes daunting. We looked at all those plants underwater today, and then you think all the work that's gone into every single one of those plants. Well, you see, nature also loses millions and millions of plants like that, but the work that we have to put into those plants is nothing. So you can throw a whole lot away. Nature can destroy a whole lot without causing a great deal of angst in her human population. So it's not quite the same. Have I said enough? I think I have. And I hope there will be a few questions if there's time. Yeah.
Hey, well, kia ora, Hugh. Tēnei te mihi ki a koe anō, mō tō kōrero ātāhua, I tēnei pō, ai tēnā koe. So thank you so much for awesome kōrero tonight. It's really great to hear the fuller story about Hinewai and Ōtani Rito. You know, like I said, I've been there with my university days. I haven't actually been back. But obviously I've got on with some other work. Yeah. But yeah, it's a real pleasure to hear that story from you personally. But also all those other clues and views for us to think about. But definitely we've got time for questions, so let's go for it, people. I'm going to come over with this, and you stay there with that, and they can speak into this. I'll go over here. I've seen a hand up.
Am I allowed to? One's very quick. I was just curious about the poroporo you mentioned at Hinewai, because I know that there's two species out there. There's the common Solanum laciniatum, which is everywhere around Christchurch, and then you've got a special threatened aviculare, which is down in the coastal areas. So I was just curious which ones were colonising the slopes.
Both are. Hinewai is very lucky we have both species growing side by side, and they look so similar to some people. The flowers look pretty different, as you probably know. The aviculare, the northern poroporo, which comes only as far south as Banks Peninsula and stops. That's one of the southern limit plants. It doesn't have that sort of frilled webbing between the petals, so it looks like a little pale blue or even white sometimes star. And Solanum laciniatum, the southern poroporo, has a bigger flower that looks round because the petals have got a frill in between them, and they're a lovely deep purple, bluey purple. Some people say they can tell a difference vegetatively. I actually can't. I sometimes think I know, but then I don't. But if you see them in flower, you've got no problem. Yes, there's two there. Yeah. Laciniatum's far, in a way, the more common of the two on Hinewai. Yeah.
And my other question was sort of a more hypothetical one. If you had $10 million or $100 million to spend on conservation on the Canterbury Plains, how would you spend it? Would you buy land? Would you plant? Would you weed? Would you do all of the above?
Oh, well, with that much money, you could do both, and you could get your 1,000 hectares and probably put a fence around it as well. Yes, I think I would do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm a hill person. I get a little bit anxious on the flats. But that is how I would spend it, yeah.
Was there someone else over here yet? Yep.
Kia ora, Hugh. Thanks for the story. I just love hearing it. One bit of the story you haven't expanded on is what are you actually doing when you're not sitting on your veranda, on your deck?
Well, I didn't talk about any of the work, did I? If I try and be brief, but no, the several really important things we use our time outside. It's a lot of inside work to do too, so I never get enough wet days too. But on every fine day we're outside. Number one really is keeping what farmers regard as noxious weeds off the boundaries. We're legally bound to do it. And I won't go into there's probably ECAN people here, aren't there? I won't. We've had a huge fight with ECAN, but never.
I won't tell on you, but
never with their boundary demands. We've always agreed that none of our gorse should go into clean farmland, and we've worked very hard, and it takes a lot of time because we don't put a helicopter up and spray along the boundaries. That would be totally counterproductive for us. We do it all by hand. So it's tedious weeding, cutting off the gorse at ground level and poisoning them. Unfortunately, we do poison them. We tried initially just to dig it out, but then, of course, you're making so much disturbance, and then you get millions of young gorse, which is far harder to deal with than ones that have already thinned themselves out. So we do cut to ground level and poison the stumps with glyphosate, dare I say it, because we thought to begin with that was the most benign of all the evil poisons you could use. So the boundary control takes a lot of our time, and the fencing as well. And we've got huge fencing issues now with these weather events, really major ones. These are just ordinary farm fences, though, 7-wire farm fences to keep the neighbours' cattle and sheep out. But also from the very beginning, we set up a track network, even on the little original Hinewai of 109 hectares, and now we're looking after 1,500 hectares. We decided from the very beginning that we would make tracks not just for our own management purposes, but also to enable everybody freely and without needing to ask permission or anything, just to come and walk on Hinewai. And we thought conservation must come first, so if there was ever a clash, this is 35 years ago, we set up this initial program, our sort of management guidelines, and we thought if there was ever a clash, it would be the people who would go down the gurgler first. We'd never compromise on our conservation goals. And, you know, in 35 years, we've never, ever closed the reserve off to people, not even when major droughts meant the fire risk was very high. We just think it's impossible to close it off anyway. So we just try with notices and education and try as many cautions as we can. But the fire that we had in 2011 was not caused by people. It was lightning, which is how the original fires pre-people times would have been. So we have had fires, scares started by people, but the big one, which burnt about 1/4 of Hinewai's area, was a lightning strike. But what burnt was the gorse, because it's in gorse's best interest to burn, you know, because it ages quickly, and then if nothing else happens, all these shade-tolerant natives just obliterate it. So gorse doesn't want that, evolutionarily speaking. So it burns, it makes itself so flammable, it burns, and then this huge seed bank in the soil just puts up a lot of young gorse again. So as far as the species is concerned, that's what it wants to do. Kānaka's tried to do that too, but it's hasn't been quite as successful as gorse is doing it. It's sort of flammable, but not nearly as flammable as people think. So it's sort of got part way there. So then looking after track network, That's Tina's question, isn't it? Looking after the track network is the second biggest thing we do. The third biggest thing we do is controlling animals, introduced mammals that are difficult, deleterious to our goals, to our restoration goals. But this gets even more complicated because this sounds like heresy if I say this. Because we know that rats, or we suspect strongly that rats are our biggest enemy of all, in terms of the birds that are left there, we don't actually target stoats, ferrets, weasels, wildcats, and what else? Those ones in particular, the wildcats and the mustelids. There's no way, over 1,500 hectares of wild hill country that is not an island, we could do anything significant to the rats. So that's what I believe. If we did, the input and the management and the intrusion would be just so huge. So again, we fall back on minimum interference management. We only interfere if we know that what we're doing is going to be really obviously beneficial. So we hammer the possums, and we trap everything around the houses, rats, mice, stoats, ferrets, weasels, wildcats. But over the whole reserve, no, we don't actually have a predator reduction program. And all the birds that have survived are thriving, and as the habitat gets better and better, they actually get more resistant to those predators. And also, there's a lot of natural selection going on. The birds that have survived, the ones that don't act in a way that make them less vulnerable to cats and stoats and rats, all those genes get knocked out. We've had hundreds of years to do this now. So our native birds are being naturally selected for by the presence of all these. We'd much rather not have those predators here. But can you believe that we don't target them? Because the rats are the worst of the lot, and we can't deal with the rats. And if we dealt with, say, the wildcats and the stoats, the rat numbers would go up and we'd make things worse, not better. This is sometimes in management of areas like this, you have to be so realistic that you sort of come to conclusions that don't sound very sensible at first. And if I just got time to, one of the many things we do, the fourth one is we look out for exotic plants that are deleterious. And just to give you an idea of the figures, we've got about something like 340 native vascular plant species. That's like ferns and herbs and trees and vines, but not counting the mosses and the lichens and liverworts and everything. About 330. And we've got almost that number, maybe 270 exotic vascular plant species. And you'd think this was just an absolute no-no if we're trying to restore the ecosystem to as close to natural as we can get. But in fact, we really target about 4 or 5 of those. And sycamore's one, Pinus radiatus is another, old man's beard clematis is another one, wandering willy is another one, but it's very limited in extent. The awful thing would be that if there was a plant that we identified as really deleterious, but it was already beyond our management abilities to control, then your realism has to take a real hit, because you've virtually got to say, have to accept this as part of the new ecology of this area. We're going to make things worse if we try and deal with it. So those are 4 things we do out of about 20.
I think I got...
That's interesting, but first of all, I want to say thank you, and it's such an honour to actually meet you in person.
Thank you.
Just say thank you.
Thank you.
Talking about the Pinus radiatus, I've only been in Motu Carrara for like a few years, and the thing that I have noticed, I don't know how many other people have, is the dieback of Pinus radiatus. Fast.
Fast dieback.
Like, we had the rain, we had that rain, and then we had the cutting of the tops of the trees, as they do around the microcarpa and the pine.
Yep.
And all in the middle, they all died.
Oh, yeah.
Like the whole line of them.
Yeah.
Up, and this person here can see, they're up and died.
Yeah.
There. But what's actually happening is there is actually a bug in the Pinus radiatus in Motu Carrara that I have personally noticed, and the trees are actually dying.
Yeah.
So
Well, lots of things could kill Pinus. They hate having their feet wet. Pinus radiata doesn't
no,
like.
this is actually more than it's a whole line. They're in the
Yeah,
middle.
okay.
Like there's a whole either side. they're all right. Now there's a little bug coming through. You can actually see it's like they start to die.
Well, there is a very well-known disease of Pinus radiata called Dothostroma pinei. It's a fungus, and it causes needle dieback and can kill trees as well. But certainly,
That's it. Will
that
it
could
kill
be
other
it.
trees though?
No.
I mean, I'm trying
Oh, it'll
to
hurt other pine trees, but not. It won't hurt any natives.
Okay.
No, absolutely not.
Will it
Yeah.
affect the microcarpa?
No, I don't think that fungus does. No, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Macrocarpa's got its own diseases. It has a bad canker disease, like a cancer. Yeah.
Okay. Can you stop Can you stop this bug?
Oh yes, people do treat it. If it's in commercial forestry, they can spray for it.
Yeah.
Yep, with the fungicide. Yep. Yeah. But overall, you'll find that just very local, particularly in Canterbury. It loves moist conditions, so Canterbury is usually too dry for it to really flourish.
I'm talking about trees about 30 years old. Trees.
Yeah, it can certainly affect trees 30 years old, for sure. Right. But I think you'll find overall Pinus radiata's got a huge amount of vigour in Canterbury. No, that's interesting. Oh, yeah.
Colin's got a question. I know it's been this side, but we will come over there. Andrew, yep. And we're all enjoying this, eh? We're going to carry on. We're happy. Yeah, cool.
Oh, Colin's got a question.
Kia ora, dear Hugh. Thank you so much for your wonderful inspiration. I'm looking for some sort of reconciliation or truce here, and I'm wondering if we could replace the word or for and also add another and, which you've also touched on, which is pest management. So it would be site-specific natural regeneration and site-specific planting and site-specific pest management.
Wonderful. To which I can only say yes.
Well done, Colin. There's questions over that side, was there? Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. A bit of a hypothetical question for you. If you realised that there was a missing plant species in the ecology in the reserve, and there wasn't a seed source, but you could bring in an echo source plant from somewhere else, would you plant it?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, and I should have perhaps mentioned that. It's interesting on Banks Peninsula. We thought we had about 20 extinctions, which is not very many in the plants, which is not very many. Out of the whole native vascular plant was of Banks Peninsula about 560 species, and 20. Some of those were probably extremely rare anyway. They were maybe even just waifs and strays that managed to get there and then disappeared because they were outcompeted. So it's not very many. When we think of the bird extinctions compared with the plant extinctions, that's more worrying, but most of the plant species are still there. So in terms of just Hinewai itself, yes, we did consider introducing stuff from as close as possible. The amazing thing is, every time that happened, we found the plant was back on its own. The one that we knew hadn't exactly disappeared, but was extremely rare, was the broadleaf cabbage tree or toy, Cordyline indivisa. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant, one of my favourite trees, to be honest. So we knew there wasn't on Little Hinewai, 109 hectares. This is way back in the 1980s. And so we knew there was a population in the head of the Stony Bay Valley, which is now part of Hinewai, but it wasn't then. So we traipsed, every time we thought that it might be seeding, we traipsed up there and never found seed. It's the most amazingly periodic and shy seeder. I don't know how it manages to do things, but it does. So we never found it. And one day, I'm probably exaggerating, so I was on my way back for one of these seed missions, but that makes a better story. You should never let the facts get in the way of a good story. But somewhere nearby, anyway, we came back through what we then called Tom's clearing, because he had cleared Kānaka for firewood, the previous owner, out of that block. And there was a seedling toy. Tiny, tiny. So I whipped a little fence around it to stop the hares and the possums getting it, and it grew into a beautiful toy and flowered only once in its whole lifetime. Produced maybe in that one flowering maybe 10,000 seeds, but all the same, nature's usually much more generous than that in her seed production. And then after that, we kept finding toi all over the place. So it just completely looked after itself. But I'm not really answering the questions. If I really was absolutely convinced that a plant was missing, no. Now I wouldn't reintroduce it, to be honest. I would just keep wandering around Hinewai with my eyes sharp, thinking one day I'm going to find this. And the best of all is, the best story of all is Melissa's story. Melissa's here. When Melissa found Ptosphaerum obcordatum, the heart-leaved kuhuku, that was just mind-blowing. That was 170 years since that small tree, it's not a tiny wee herb, this is a tree, 170 years since that was last recorded, and it was recorded once, by Etienne Raoul, a French botanist, surgeon, naturalist on a ship in the early days of Akaroa, early European days of Akaroa. 170 years. And so while I'm walking around looking for the yellow beach mistletoe, was seen as recently as 1970s on what is now either on Hinewai or on our next block of land, which we're so keen to add, which we're probably going to have to take it by force before too long. Because that's where it was recorded from, near the cab stand on Black Beach on Tawarariki. So I hope one day we'll find, and I would rather keep watching for it than to go across to its nearest known source now, which is Craigieburn Forest Park, or maybe in the foothills around Oxford, and bring it back across the plains. Does that answer it? And it sounds very pedantic and very precious, but that's what I would do. Or not do.
You saw a hand there, and Andrew's at the back, and then I'll come to you. I don't know how many more we'll have. I'm just going to keep going. But you're happy, Hugh, to keep going?
I'm happy, but I'm sure that some people are wanting to get home.
Yeah, true.
Beds.
Yeah, a couple more.
Thank you for your marvellous talk, Hugh. It's been very inspirational. I guess one question was that, as I understand it, that Hinewai is east-facing and gets quite a lot of rain. How do you feel about natural regeneration on some of these north-facing dry slopes over on this side of the peninsula? That's
a good question, because I did mention that time was involved, and on drier parts it would be slower. But I would dare to say that the whole of Banks Peninsula is ripe for natural regeneration. And I'm not saying that the projects on Banks Peninsula itself and planting are not worth it, but I would say that, to keep that in perspective, nature would get on with it quicker than you think. And even on the north-facing slopes of the Port Hills, it would all happen, but just take more time, that's all.
So we let the gorse go first?
Well, certainly not suggesting that you plant gorse as a nurse canopy. No, I don't quite go that far, because I'd rather not even have it on Hinewai, but this is another example of realism. What ECAM was asking us to do, in a draconian fashion, was going to make things worse. So if you're being told to do something that you know is going to do things worse, you basically ignore them. Or tell them to go and jump in the lake or something, which is what we did. And I have to say that now they're far, far more accommodating and understanding. But for 30 years we were fighting the regional council. It's ridiculous, totally stupid. No, but I would say that you'd be surprised where natural regeneration occurs anywhere. But the more extreme examples, like the northern slopes, the Port Hills, would be the slowest on Banks Peninsula. Yeah, and then there is an argument for planting, preferably native, some fast-growing nurse crop, and it would be things like Tānuka and Ngaio, fast-growing things which locally sourced that will rapidly give way, but will give shelter in the meantime. Yeah, I would go along with that.
Okay, I've got one more question right here.
Hi Hugh, thanks for speaking to us tonight. I'm a market gardener based at Lincoln, but due to urban sprawl, I'm actually looking at marginal land in future. My question was actually similar to the man beforehand, in terms of northern slopes and how fast things can regenerate. Water interests me as to how quickly do you think on those northern slopes would water return to the landscape?
Water's such an interesting question. I actually don't know, because I'm not a hydrologist, and people keep saying to me that with the more forest on Hinewai, is your rainfall going up. But the weather systems that come across Banks Peninsula are so much vaster than 1,500 hectares that are now largely forested. I mean, you can think that with all that transpiration going on, the air above Hinewai would hold more moisture, but the weather systems are so vast, I think the effect would be overwhelmed, I think, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to stop there. So, yet again, Hugh, I'll take that so you can't speak again. No, stay here. But I really just wanted to say thanks so much again. We do have a little gift for you, so I'm going to do a moonwalk again. So, kia ora anō, tēnei te mihi ki a koe anō moto kōrero. It's been so great. I mean, it's been a late one, but I think everyone's enjoyed just hearing you talk. You've got so much knowledge, and you've got practical experience to back it up. So just thank you so much for sharing everything you have with us. Tēnā koe. And I think that's it, people. So thanks so much. Hey, just want to thank all of our great Te Ara Kākāriki people, especially Letitia for organising everything behind the scenes and organising everyone else to be here as well and help out. I really appreciate it. I know we tell you that, and all of you guys that help us out. Our Kaimahi for Nature people that have been so great this year as well. A couple more years to go. Hopefully Doc will give us some more money or something. But, you know, we're keen to carry on. But it has been really great, Hugh, too, to think about some ways that we could go forward. Of course, our 1,000-hectare site, of course it would have some natural regeneration. We wouldn't want to plant at all. And the other sites we are doing, of course, we want them to grow themselves, and that's the idea as well out on the plains. So, and the eco-sourcing debate, I think, is really good because we had that well back at the start, and I think Frances, who I mentioned before, she was a really big advocate for that. I was sort of on the fence a little bit, but I've learnt so much since because I wasn't an ecologist, not an ecologist, so I've learnt so much. But thankfully, we got Colin and others involved to guide us on that journey, and we really, because our challenge was with the nurseries that we were getting the plants off, and we had to educate them. Motu Karara, of course, was great, but other nurseries we were starting to use hadn't quite gone through that journey, so we needed some guidance, and that's what Colin and others helped us do by giving us a geographical boundary where we could accept seed from for our plantings. So that's how we did it, and we definitely uphold that ever since. I know in those early, maybe 2009, we weren't as fussy because we didn't know as much, but since then we've really held true to that, and that's the advice we give to our landowners as well. So yeah, thank you so much for reinforcing that. So yeah, thanks so much everybody. I hope you had a great night. There might be some stuff still left out there, some wine and things, but yeah, hope you had a great night, and please come and support our plantings in spring. Get out there amongst it and enjoy being on the plains and with the great community that we have, and yeah, look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again for coming. Kia ora.
put the other side. Yeah. No, if it's got an on and off.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and take off. I've got an hour's drive home still. Nice to be able to do this. Thanks for telling me about this. I won't know about that otherwise. Yeah, and you haven't been here. Fair enough. All right, see you tomorrow.